What caused the Great Depression in 1929? A lot of people think it was Black Tuesday, the great stock market crash of October 28th. But that's not true. You see, 9 years before the Great Depression, there was a mini depression that took place from 1920 to 1921. The stock market fell by 50% and corporate profits dropped by 90. And then the market rebounded. We had the Roaring 20s, one of the most successful economies of the time. But there were a few different factors in 1929 that made this one different. See, in 1920, when that little depression hit, we did not have anywhere near as much mortgage debt back then as we did in 1929. Look at this peak. 1920 to 1929, the stock market more than quadrupled. So people thought it was safe to take on a lot of dangerous debt because they thought times were just going to stay great. People were buying stocks on margin, which means when you go broke, you don't just lose 100% of your money. You lose that much, but then you may owe 30, 40, or 300% of that number. Here's where the gold standard comes into play. The stock market crash led to a great deal of bankruptcies and, of course, a lot of home mortgage foreclosures, which led to a huge shortage in the money supply. Because the United States and the rest of the world was on the gold standard, we could not print money to alleviate the liquidity issue. This led to a 12% contraction in the money supply for 1929 alone. This was the beginning of the 31% contraction in the US money supply. When the money supply contracts that much, that fast, the economy breaks. And when that happens, we go into deflation. If you're curious about why deflation can be bad, please look at my playlist right here. The straw that broke the camel's back that made the Great Depression so much more long-lasting was the passage of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. For those of you who don't know what a tariff is, it just means it's a tax for anything that we import from another country. And of course, that tax of imports get passed on to the consumer, so it means imported goods become more expensive for the American buyer. The goal was to get more Americans to buy American-made products, therefore beefing up American manufacturing and saving the US economy. But that's not what happened at all. Because we tariffed the rest of the world's stuff, the rest of the world tariffed all of our goods. This just made everyone else's goods all over the world much more expensive for everybody. Everything becoming so expensive killed a lot of world trade, and that turned a US problem into a global economic catastrophe. Even 100 years ago, the world was so globalized and interconnected that we needed each other in order for our own economies to thrive. And when you're the world's largest importer and exporter, limiting the trade of either of those two avenues means the whole world suffers. And you know the rest. Deflation from 1929 to 1932 hit 25% on an average rate of about 10% a year. Gross domestic product per capita dropped by nearly 30%, and wages dropped by over 40%. So even if you had a job, you were making almost half of what you did before the Great Depression started. If you think what's happening now is similar to what's happening in the Great Depression, that's absolutely not true. And no, we are not in a similar situation as the Great Depression compared to today. I made this chart comparing US mortgages as a percentage of GDP, and you could see by 2008 it was extremely high. We are much lower than that from even 15 years ago. And while the money supply has contracted, it's because under the Trump administration we printed more money than we ever have. But so far the contraction in money supply is more measured and controlled. It's looking good. Since we're not in the gold standard, the Fed has a lot more power with altering the money supply, just in case something bad really does happen. I'm the Geo Husar, and I'm about to make some breaded chicken for my kids. Thanks for watching. Give me a follow.